Queen Velthara's 6 arms trembled with rage as she stood in the grand punishment chamber of her floating palace. The crystalline walls reflected her purple skin and glowing yellow eyes as she glared down at the human kneeling before her. Jiho. Kim, a 28-year-old man from Earth, kept his head bowed low, his dark hair falling over his face. The escape had been embarrassing. 3 human prisoners had somehow slipped past the security grid while Jiho was on duty. Now, dozens of Zephyrian nobles filled the chamber's viewing galleries, their insect-like wings buzzing with excitement. They loved watching humans suffer. It was their favorite entertainment. "You pathetic creature," Queen Velthara hissed, her voice echoing through the vast room. "Your weakness has made me look foolish in front of my court." Her energy whip came, alive with crackling blue electricity. The weapon was designed to cause maximum pain without killing. She had used it on countless humans before, and they always screamed beautifully. The other aliens leaned forward in their seats, their compound eyes gleaming. Some had already started recording with their neural implants. Human punishment videos were popular throughout the Empire. They would share this moment across 1,000 worlds. Jiho remained perfectly still. His simple grey uniform was already torn from previous beatings, but he showed no fear. This confused the Queen. Usually, humans begged for mercy by now. They would cry, plead, or try to run, but this one just knelt there waiting. "Look at me when I speak to you," Velthara commanded, raising the whip higher. The energy field around it grew brighter, casting dancing shadows across the chamber walls. Jiho slowly lifted his head. His brown eyes met hers without anger or hatred. Instead, she saw something that made her stomach twist. Genuine sadness. Not for himself, but seemingly for her. "I understand you must punish me, Your Majesty," he said quietly. His voice carried no trace of sarcasm or hidden defiance. "I accept full responsibility for my failure." The Queen's whip arm froze mid-swing. In 300 years of ruling, no human had ever spoken to her like this. They usually cursed her, called her a monster, or sobbed about their families back on Earth. But Jiho spoke as if he truly cared about disappointing her. "You think your false respect will save you?" she snarled, bringing the whip down hard across his back. The energy. Weapon tore through his shirt and left a burning mark on his skin. The smell of burned flesh filled the air, but Jiho didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he bowed deeper, pressing his forehead almost to the floor. "I failed you, Your Majesty. The prisoners escaped because I was not vigilant enough. How may I serve better?" The chamber fell silent. Even the excited buzzing of wings stopped. The Zephyrian nobles stared in shock. This was not how humans were supposed to behave. They were meant to be weak, emotional creatures who broke easily under pressure. Queen Velthara felt something she had never experienced before. Uncertainty. Her whip arm trembled as she stared at the human. His shoulders shook slightly. But, not from fear or pain, he seemed to be genuinely upset about letting her down. "Stand up," she ordered, her voice quieter now. When Jiho rose to his feet, she saw tears in his eyes. But they weren't tears of self-pity or terror. They looked like tears of regret. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I know I deserve punishment, but please tell me what I did wrong so I won't fail you again." The Queen's world tilted. Something was very wrong with this human, or very wrong with everything she thought she knew about humans. 3 days later, Queen Velthara called Jiho to her private study. The room was smaller than the punishment chamber, filled with floating holographic displays showing maps of conquered worlds. Earth glowed red among them, a reminder of humanity's defeat. "You were late to your post yesterday," she said, looking up from her desk. It wasn't true. Jiho had actually arrived early, but she needed a reason to test him again. "I apologize deeply, Your Majesty," Jiho replied, immediately dropping to one knee. "There is no excuse for my tardiness. It won't happen again." The Queen's jaw tightened. Any Zephyrian would have protested, argued, or at least shown confusion. They would have defended themselves. But this human simply accepted blame that wasn't even his. She activated a neural disruptor, a small device that sent waves of pain directly into the brain. Most humans collapsed within seconds, screaming until their throats went raw. She aimed it at Jiho and pressed the button. His body went rigid as the invisible waves hit him. His hands clenched into fists, and sweat beaded on his forehead. But he didn't fall, he didn't scream. After 10 long seconds, she turned it off. "Thank you for the correction, Your Majesty," Jiho said, his voice slightly strained but still respectful. "I will be more mindful of my duties." Queen Velthara stared at him. "Don't you want to hurt me back?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why would I want that? You're trying to make me better at my job. Pain teaches lessons. I'm grateful you care enough to teach me." The Queen felt that strange uncertainty again. She dismissed him and spent the next hour staring at Earth's image on her display. Over the following week, she found new reasons to summon Jiho. She burned his hand with a plasma torch when he allegedly cleaned his weapon improperly. She used sonic waves to give him splitting headaches for supposedly speaking too loudly. She even had him stand outside in the freezing night air for hours because his uniform looked wrinkled. Each time, Jiho responded the same way. He thanked her. He apologized. He asked how he could do better. Never once did anger flash in his eyes. Never once did he curse her name or plot revenge. This was completely different from her own people. When Zephyrians were punished, they schemed. They formed alliances. They waited for opportunities to strike back. It was natural behavior, the way of the strong. But Jiho seemed to have no interest in strength or revenge. The other nobles began to notice their queen's obsession. Commander Velnox approached her after a court meeting, his forearms crossed in disapproval. "My queen, the council is concerned," he said in their clicking language. "You spend too much time with the human. It's unusual." "I'm studying the enemy," she replied coldly. "By torturing one guard, we have thousands of humans. Why this one?" She had no good answer. The truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about Jiho's reactions. Every night she lay in her rest chamber wondering what drove him. Was he planning something? Was this some clever human trick? But when she watched him through security cameras, she saw no deception. During his off-duty hours, Jiho helped other human guards with their work. When younger guards made mistakes, he quietly fixed them before the Zephyrians noticed. He shared his food rations with humans who looked hungry. General Velkrathos, her military commander, was more direct in his criticism. "You're making yourself look weak," he told her during a private meeting. "The humans are talking. They think you've gone soft." "Let them talk," she snapped. "And our own people. They whisper that you're infected with human weakness. Some suggest you're unfit to rule." The words hit her like physical blows. In Zephyrian culture, showing interest in a conquered species was the ultimate humiliation. Leaders who went soft were quickly replaced, but she couldn't stop. Every interaction with Jiho raised new questions about everything she thought she knew, about strength, power, and what it meant to be superior. 2 weeks into her strange fascination, Queen Velthara's punishments became more creative and brutal. She told herself this was science. She was studying human breaking points. But deep down she knew the truth. Jiho's impossible responses were driving her crazy. Today, she had him brought to the palace's lower levels, where the temperature controls were broken. The air was so cold that her own breath came out in white puffs. She watched through the security feed as Jiho stood at attention for 6 hours straight, his lips turning blue, his whole body shaking from the cold. When she finally had him brought back to her chamber, his fingers were nearly frozen. But the first words out of his mouth were, "Thank you for the endurance training, Your Majesty. I feel stronger now." "Stronger," she hissed. "You nearly froze to death." Jiho nodded seriously. "Yes, and now I know I can survive worse conditions if needed. You've made me a better guard." The Queen's hands clenched into fists. How was this possible? She had studied human psychology for decades. Humans were supposed to be emotional, weak creatures who broke under pressure. They were meant to beg, to cry, to hate their captors. But Jiho seemed to genuinely believe she was helping him improve. The next day she tried a different approach. She had him kneel on sharp metal spikes for an hour while she worked at her desk. The points weren't long enough to cause serious injury, but they had to be incredibly painful. She kept glancing up, waiting for him to ask for mercy. Instead, she found him perfectly still, his eyes closed as if he were meditating. When she finally told him to stand, Small drops of blood stained the floor where he'd been kneeling. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Centered, Your Majesty," he replied calmly. "Pain has a way of clearing the mind. I understand my duties better now." Queen Velthara felt like screaming. Every torture technique that had broken thousands of other humans seemed to make Jiho more peaceful, more grateful. It was impossible. It was insane. She started summoning him multiple times each day. She used devices that sent electric shocks through his nervous system. She had him carry heavy loads until his muscles screamed. She deprived him of sleep for days at a time. Nothing worked. Nothing broke him. The worst part was how he looked at her during these sessions, not with fear or hatred, but with something. That looked almost like compassion, as if he felt sorry for her, as if he understood that she was the one suffering. Commander Velnox finally confronted her after catching her watching security footage of Jiho's daily routines for the third time that week. "My queen, this has gone too far," he said, his insect-like wings buzzing with agitation. "The entire court is talking about your obsession with this human." "I'm conducting research," she snapped, not looking away from the screen showing Jiho helping an elderly human woman carry water buckets. "Research? You've tortured him dozens of times and he's still just a guard. What could you possibly be learning?" She paused the video. On the screen, Jiho was smiling as he helped the old woman. It was a genuine smile, full of warmth. When was the last time she had seen a Zephyrian smile like that? When was the last time she had smiled like that? "He's different," she said quietly. "He's human," Velnox replied with disgust. "They're all weak. This one is probably just broken. In the head." But that wasn't right. Jiho wasn't broken. If anything, he seemed more whole than anyone she'd ever met. While her own people schemed and plotted and lived in constant fear of betrayal, this human seemed to live without any anger at all. "The nobles are losing respect for you," Velnox continued. "They think you've been infected with human weakness. General Velkrathos has been asking questions about your fitness to rule." The warning should have terrified her. In Zephyrian society, weak leaders were quickly eliminated, but she found herself caring less about politics and more about the mystery. "Of Jiho Kim, let them talk," she said, starting the video again. "My queen, please. You're destroying yourself over a slave." She finally turned to face her advisor. "What if we're wrong about them? What if humans aren't weak at all?" Velnox's compound eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible. We conquered their entire planet in 6 months. We conquered their technology and their governments. But did we conquer them?" She gestured to the screen. "Look at him. After everything I've done, he's still himself, unbroken, unbowed. How is that weakness?" The commander's wings stopped buzzing. For the first time in centuries of service, he looked truly worried about his queen's sanity. That night, Queen Velthara sat alone in her private chambers, surrounded by floating holographic displays. The palace was quiet except for the hum of machinery and the distant sounds of guards patrolling the corridors. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jiho's face, calm, respectful, impossibly peaceful even in pain. She activated her personal computer system and typed in a command that made her feel like a criminal. "Access human. Prisoner files. Jiho Kim, identification number 7749. The file materialized in front of her, glowing softly in the darkness. Most human records were basic: name, age, capture location, work assignment. But Jiho's file was thicker than usual. The Zephyrians always kept detailed records on humans who showed any unusual behavior. "Born in Seoul, Earth, 28 years old," she read aloud. "Captured during the 3rd wave of planetary occupation." Standard information so far. But as she scrolled deeper, her eyes widened. Before the conquest, Jiho had been a teacher at a special school for children with disabilities. The file contained video footage from Earth's surveillance systems, recorded before the invasion. She watched, fascinated, as a younger Jiho worked patiently with a boy who couldn't speak properly. Hour after hour, he repeated simple words with the child, never showing frustration, always encouraging. "That's it, Minjun," Jiho said in the video, his face lighting up when the boy finally pronounced a word correctly. "You're doing so well. I'm proud of you." The Queen paused the video. She had never seen anyone look at another being with such pure joy. In Zephyrian society, the weak were either eliminated or ignored, but here was Jiho, celebrating a small victory with a disabled child as if it were the most important thing. In the universe, she continued reading. After school hours, Jiho volunteered at homeless shelters, feeding people who had nothing to give him in return. He spent weekends visiting elderly humans in care facilities, just talking with them. The psychological evaluation conducted by Earth's government before the invasion painted a picture that made no sense to her. Subject shows extreme empathy levels, the report stated, derives primary satisfaction from helping others, often at personal cost, shows no interest in material wealth or social status. Psychological profile indicates someone who genuinely believes in the inherent worth of all living beings. Queen Velthara leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. This wasn't the profile of a weak creature. This was something else entirely, something her species had no words for. She accessed more files, diving deeper into human records. What she found shook her to her core. Thousands of humans in her labor camps had similar backgrounds. Teachers, doctors, social workers, volunteers, people who had spent their lives helping others. One file belonged to an elderly human woman named Kyung. Before the conquest, she had run an orphanage for 30 years, caring for children nobody else wanted. Another file showed a young man named Taiho, who had been training to become a doctor, specializing in treating poor patients for free. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself. According to everything she'd been taught, humans were selfish, violent creatures who only cared about themselves. But these files told a different story entirely. She found video footage from Earth's final days before the invasion. She expected to see humans fighting each other, hoarding resources, showing their true selfish nature under pressure. Instead, she watched in amazement as humans formed groups to help each other survive. They shared food with strangers. They risked their lives to save people they'd never met. In one video, she watched Jiho during the invasion itself. As Zephyrian ships burned his city, he wasn't running for safety. He was helping injured people reach medical centers, carrying children to safety, organizing evacuation efforts for the elderly and disabled. Even when capture was certain, even when resistance was hopeless, these humans kept helping each other. The Queen sat in stunned silence for hours, scrolling through file after file. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Humans weren't weak at all. They possessed something her advanced, powerful species completely lacked. They had chosen to be kind, even when kindness brought them no benefit, even when it put them in danger, even when it led to their conquest and enslavement. Her species had mistaken this kindness for weakness. They had interpreted humanity's refusal to abandon their compassion as evidence of inferiority. But what if they had been wrong? What if the humans' greatest strength was the very thing the Zephyrians saw as their greatest flaw? As dawn approached, Queen Velthara finally understood why Jiho never fought back, never sought revenge, never showed hatred. It wasn't because he was broken or afraid. It was because he was exactly what he appeared to be, someone who genuinely cared more about others than himself. For the first time in her 300-year life, she felt something she'd never experienced before: shame. The next morning, Queen Velthara paced her private chambers like a caged animal. The files she'd read all night had turned her world upside down. Every belief she'd held about humans, about strength, about what made a species superior, it all felt like lies. Now she couldn't focus on her royal duties. During the morning briefing, she barely heard Commander Velnock's report on mining operations. Her mind kept replaying the videos of Jiho helping those children, caring for the helpless, choosing kindness even when the world was ending around him. "Bring me the human guard," she finally announced, interrupting a discussion about weapon production. "Jiho Kim, now." Her advisors exchanged worried glances. This was the third time this week she'd summoned the human outside of scheduled punishment sessions, but none of them dared question their queen directly. 20 minutes later, Jiho entered her private study. He moved with that same quiet dignity she'd grown to expect, bowing respectfully before standing at attention. But today something was different about how she looked at him. The files had changed everything. "Sit down," she commanded, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. It was the first time she'd ever offered a human a seat in her presence. Jiho hesitated. "Your Majesty, I don't think—" "I said sit," said. He carefully lowered himself into the chair, clearly uncomfortable with this break in protocol. His hands rested quietly in his lap, and he kept his eyes downcast out of respect. Queen Velthara studied his face for a long moment. Without the distraction of planning punishments, she really looked at him for the first time. He was younger than she'd realized, probably in his late 20s. There were lines around his eyes, not from age but from smiling. Even after months of captivity and torture, he looked like someone who had spent his life smiling. "I want you to answer a question," she said finally, "and I want complete honesty." "Of course, Your Majesty. Why don't you hate me?" The question hung in the air between them. Jiho's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of surprise she'd ever seen from him. He was quiet for so long that she wondered if he'd even answer. "May I speak freely?" he asked. "Yes." Jiho took a deep breath and finally looked directly into her eyes. "Because hate would hurt me more than it would hurt you." The simple honesty of his words hit her like a physical blow. "That makes no sense. I've tortured you. I've caused you pain for weeks." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "You have. So why aren't you angry? Why don't you want revenge?" Jiho leaned forward slightly, and for a moment his careful composure cracked. She saw something raw and genuine in his expression, not weakness but incredible strength. "Your Majesty, I've worked with hurt people my whole life. Children who were abandoned, elderly people who were forgotten, homeless individuals who society threw away. And I learned something important. Hurt people, hurt people." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "When I look at you, I don't see a monster. I see someone who's in pain, someone who was probably taught that causing pain was the only way to feel powerful, someone who maybe never learned that there was another way to live." Queen Velthara felt something crack inside her chest. "You think I'm in pain?" "I think you're afraid," Jiho said gently. "Afraid of appearing weak, afraid of losing control, afraid that if you stop hurting people, they might hurt you first. But fear isn't strength, Your Majesty. It's just fear, wearing a crown." The words were like acid on her soul. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You know nothing about me." But Jiho didn't flinch at her outburst. Instead, his expression became even more compassionate. "I know you stay awake at night. I know you watch us through the security cameras, trying to understand something you can't name. I know that every time you hurt me, you look more lost than angry. Stop talking." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Everyone deserves compassion. Your Majesty, even those who hurt us, even those who think compassion is weakness, that's what makes us human, not our bodies or our technology or our weapons. It's our choice to care about each other, even when caring costs us everything." Queen Velthara sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. 300 years of certainty crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. Everything her empire had taught her about strength, about superiority, about the natural order of the universe, it all felt like the ravings of children playing with toys they didn't understand. "But we conquered you," she said weakly. "We destroyed your planet, we enslaved your people. How does that make you strong?" Jiho smiled then, the same gentle smile she'd seen in the videos from Earth. "Because we chose to stay human. You took our homes, our freedom, our families. But you couldn't take our ability to love each other. You couldn't make us stop caring. In the end, that's the only victory that really matters." For the first time in 3 centuries, Queen Velthara of the Zephyrian Empire began to cry. In the days following their conversation, Queen Velthara couldn't stop thinking about Jiho's words. She found herself watching the human workers with new eyes, seeing things she'd never noticed before. When a Zephyrian guard struck an elderly human woman for moving too slowly, the Queen felt something twist in her stomach. When she saw humans sharing their meager food rations with sick prisoners, she wondered what drove such behavior. She began conducting her own quiet experiments, not with pain and punishment this time, but with observation. Through the security cameras, she watched how humans interacted when they thought no one was looking. She saw a young human man named Dae-hyun teaching other prisoners how to read using scraps of metal to scratch letters in the dirt. She watched. An older woman named Mire comfort a teenager who cried for his lost family, holding him like a mother even though they were strangers. She observed humans creating makeshift medical care for injured workers, sharing knowledge and supplies they barely had. Most shocking of all, she heard them talking about their captors. Instead of planning revenge or expressing hatred, they spoke with sadness about their Zephyrian guards. "They don't know any better," she heard one human say to another. "Look how they treat each other. They live in fear all the time. How could they understand kindness when they've never experienced it?" These words haunted her. Was it true? Did her people live in fear? She looked around her own court with fresh eyes and realized that every interaction was based on power, dominance, or terror. Nobles schemed against each other constantly. Guards reported on their colleagues for the smallest infractions. Even her closest advisors watched their words carefully, afraid of saying something that might displease her. When had fear become the foundation of everything they built? She decided to test something small. During the next day's work assignments, she quietly ordered that human prisoners receive slightly larger food portions. Nothing dramatic, just enough to ensure they weren't starving. The change was noticed. Immediately. Commander Velnox approached her after the evening briefing, his compound eyes narrow with suspicion. "My queen, the food distribution records show irregularities. The humans are receiving more rations than protocol allows. I authorized the increase," she said simply. "May I ask why?" "Food supplies are calculated precisely. Any waste affects our efficiency ratings." She paused, realizing she had no good answer that wouldn't sound insane to Zephyrian ears. "Healthier workers are more productive workers," she said finally. Velnox's wings buzzed with agitation. "But the productivity reports show no decrease in output, despite their current ration levels. This change appears to serve no purpose except kindness." The way he said the word made it sound like a disease. In Zephyrian culture, showing unnecessary kindness to conquered peoples was seen as a dangerous weakness that could lead to rebellion and chaos. "Are you questioning my judgment?" she asked coldly. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I'm simply concerned about the precedent this sets." But the precedent was already being noticed. Over the following weeks, she made other small changes. She reduced the daily work hours for humans from 16 hours to 14. She ordered that sick prisoners receive basic medical care instead of being left to die. She banned the use of sonic torture devices for minor infractions. Each change was small, almost invisible to outside observers. But within the palace, whispers began to spread. General Velkrathos was the first to confront her directly. He visited her chambers late one evening, his massive frame filling the doorway. Unlike the diplomatic Velnox, the general was known for speaking his mind. "The troops are talking," he said without preamble. "They say you've gone soft on the humans. The troops should focus on their duties, not gossip," she replied, not looking up from her desk. "This isn't gossip. It's observation. You spend hours watching security footage of human workers. You've implemented 7 policy changes in their favor this month. You summoned that guard Jiho again yesterday for the 5th time this week." She finally looked at him. "Are you spying on me?" "I'm protecting you from yourself if necessary." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're exhibiting signs of mental contamination. Extended exposure to human psychology has been known to affect even strong minds." "Mental contamination? It's documented. Prolonged contact with humans can cause irrational emotional responses in our species. Sympathy, compassion. These are infections of the mind that weaken our natural superiority." Queen Velthera stood slowly, her anger rising. "And what would you suggest?" "Immediate isolation from human contact. Medical treatment to purge these foreign emotional influences. And perhaps a demonstration of proper strength to reassure the court that you remain fit to rule." The implication was clear. He wanted her to publicly torture humans to prove her loyalty to Zephyrian values. "Get out," she said quietly. "My queen, get out." After he left, She sat alone in the darkness, her hands shaking. For the first time, she understood what Jiho had meant about fear. Her entire empire was built on the terror of appearing weak, and now that fear was turning inward, making her own people see compassion as a threat to be eliminated. She realized with growing horror that she was trapped between two worlds, the cold, brutal efficiency of her own species and the incomprehensible warmth she'd discovered in humanity, and choosing one might cost her everything. General Velkrathos stood in the shadows of the palace's war room, surrounded by 12 of the most powerful Zephyrian nobles in the empire. The room was deep underground, where surveillance systems couldn't reach and conversations remained private. Red emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on their insect-like faces as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "She's lost her mind," whispered Lord Velthak, his forearms gesturing wildly. "Yesterday I saw her watching security footage of humans. For 3 hours straight. She barely looked up when I entered with urgent military reports." "It's worse than that," added Admiral Velnara, her wings twitching with anxiety. "She's been asking questions about our conquest methods, questions about whether we were too harsh. She actually used the word excessive when discussing our bombardment of Earth's major cities." General Velkrathos nodded grimly. He had been watching their queen's behavior for weeks, documenting every strange decision, every moment of weakness. What he'd discovered terrified him more than any enemy weapon. "The infection is spreading faster than we anticipated," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led armies across a dozen worlds. 3 days ago, she implemented new protocols requiring medical care for injured human workers. Medical care for slaves. The nobles around the table exchanged horrified glances. In Zephyrian culture, caring for conquered peoples beyond their basic utility was considered not just wasteful but dangerous. It suggested that the conquered had value beyond their labor, which could lead to thoughts of equality, rights, and eventually rebellion. "But surely this is temporary madness," suggested Count Velmor, though his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps extended isolation from human contact could cure her." General Velkrathos activated a holographic display showing security footage from the past month. The assembled nobles watched in growing alarm as scene after scene played out, their queen reducing work hours, increasing food rations, banning certain forms of punishment, and most disturbing of all, having long, private conversations with the human guard Jiho. This footage shows 17 separate meetings between the queen and the human-designated Jiho Kim, Velkrathos explained. "These are not interrogation sessions or punishment procedures. They appear to be conversations. Personal conversations." The room fell silent except for the nervous buzzing of wings. Personal conversation with a human was beyond comprehension. It suggested that the queen saw the human as something approaching an equal, which was the most dangerous heresy imaginable. "The human disease has taken root in her mind," declared Lord Velthak. "I've seen this before on conquered worlds. Prolonged exposure to human emotional patterns can cause severe psychological deterioration in our species. It starts with sympathy, progresses to empathy, and eventually leads to complete mental collapse." Admiral Velnara leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the red light. "The question is, can this infection spread to others?" "It already is," Velkrathos said darkly. Commander Velnox reported that several guards have begun following the Queen's example. Yesterday, a junior officer was caught giving water to a dehydrated human worker. When questioned, he said it seemed like the right thing to do. Those are human concepts infecting our people's minds. The implications sent ripples of fear through the group. Zephyrian society functioned on clear hierarchies and absolute order. If compassion began spreading through their ranks, it could undermine the entire foundation of their empire. Soldiers might start questioning orders. Workers might demand better treatment. The conquered might begin to seem like people rather than resources. "What do you propose?" asked Count Velmor, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Emergency intervention," Velkrathos replied. "For the safety of the empire, Queen Velthara must be removed from power before this contamination spreads further. We have documentation of her mental instability, her policy violations, and her dangerous contact with enemy personnel. Your Talking about overthrowing our queen, Admiral Velnara said quietly. That's treason. No, the general corrected. Treason is allowing a mentally compromised leader to destroy everything our ancestors built. Treason is watching our empire fall to human weakness and doing nothing to stop it. He activated another display showing economic and military reports. Look at the numbers. Production efficiency is down because of her reforms. Our warriors are asking questions about our methods. 3 colonial governors have requested clarification about treatment of conquered populations. The infection is spreading across star systems. The nobles studied the data with growing alarm. Everything Velkrathos said was true. Small acts of kindness toward humans were creating ripple effects throughout their vast empire. When? Asked Lord Velthak. Soon. Before she can implement any more dangerous reforms, before her madness spreads to key military personnel. Velkrathos looked around the table, meeting each pair of compound eyes. We are the immune system of our empire. Sometimes, to save the body, the immune system must destroy infected tissue, even if that tissue was once vital. The metaphor was chilling, but effective. One by one, the nobles nodded their agreement. They convinced themselves they were heroes, saving their civilization from a plague of human compassion. What they didn't realize was that in the levels above them, Jiho was teaching other human prisoners how to find hope in hopeless places, and that Queen Velthara was discovering what it truly meant to be strong. The coup was set in motion, but so was something far more powerful. The quiet revolution of hearts learning to care. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with activity as hundreds of Zephyrian nobles gathered for the Empire Day ceremony. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across the vast chamber, while Queen Velthara sat on her throne, wearing the traditional golden robes of state. To any observer, it looked like a normal celebration of their empire's founding. But in the shadows behind ornate pillars, General Velkrathos and his conspirators waited with weapons hidden beneath their ceremonial cloaks. They had chosen this moment carefully, a public gathering where the Queen's death could be presented as necessary for the Empire's survival. Queen Velthara barely listened to the speeches praising Zephyrian superiority and the glory of conquest. Her mind kept drifting to her recent conversations with Jiho. His words about compassion and strength had planted seeds that were growing into something she couldn't ignore. Looking out at her court, she saw the fear in their eyes, the constant tension, the way they all watched each other for signs of weakness. Was this really strength, or was it just fear wearing a crown, as Jiho had said? According to protocol, human guards were stationed around the hall's perimeter, standing perfectly still, like living statues. Jiho was among them, positioned near the main entrance. The Queen found herself glancing at him throughout the ceremony, drawing strange comfort from his calm presence. The first speaker finished his address about the glorious conquest of 17 worlds. As the second noble approached the podium, General Velkrathos gave an almost invisible signal to his allies, positioned throughout the hall. Everything happened in seconds. 4 Zephyrian conspirators suddenly drew plasma weapons from beneath their robes. The crowd gasped and scrambled for cover as energy blasts lit up the chamber. "The Queen has been contaminated by human weakness," Velkrathos shouted over the chaos. "For the safety of the Empire, she must be removed." Queen Velthara rose from her throne, her own weapon appearing in her hand. But she was surrounded, outnumbered, and caught off guard. The conspirators had planned this perfectly. "Your compassion is a disease," Lord Velthak yelled as he aimed his weapon at her heart. "You've forgotten what it means to be Zephyrian." But before he could fire, something impossible happened. Jiho had moved. Despite being positioned across the hall, despite having no weapon, despite being bound by chains of slavery, he had sprinted toward the throne the moment the attack began. His human legs carried him faster than anyone thought possible. "No!" he shouted, throwing himself between the plasma blast and Queen Velthara. The energy beam meant for her heart struck him full in the chest instead. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the steps below the throne. Smoke rose from the terrible wound, and the smell of burned flesh filled the air. The hall fell silent except for Jiho's labored breathing. Even the conspirators stopped, shocked by what they'd witnessed. A human slave had just taken a killing blow meant for his captor. Queen Velthara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his wound. She had seen thousands of beings die in her 3 centuries of life, but this felt different. This felt like watching something precious and irreplaceable slip away. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you do that?" Jiho's eyes found hers, and despite the pain he managed a small smile. "Because someone had to show them." "Show them what?" "That love is stronger than fear." Each word came with obvious effort, blood appearing at the corners of his mouth. "Your people, they can learn to be better. They just need someone to show them how." General Velkrathos raised his weapon again, aiming at the Queen. "This changes nothing. The human's death proves our point. They're weak, expendable." But Jiho used his remaining strength to push the Queen toward a side exit. "Go," he whispered urgently. "Live, learn, teach them what I taught you." As more plasma blasts filled the air around them, Queen Velthara realized that Jiho wasn't weak at all. In his final moments, faced with certain death, he had chosen to save someone who had tortured him for months. He had proven that love could overcome self-preservation, that compassion could triumph over survival instinct. "I understand now," she said, tears streaming down her face as she held his hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Jiho's grip tightened weakly. "Not strong, just human. We all have this inside us. Even your people, just buried deep." His eyes closed, and Queen Velthara felt his hand go limp in hers. In that moment, as chaos erupted around them and energy weapons lit up the ancient hall, she finally understood what true strength looked like. It wasn't the power to destroy or dominate. It was the courage to love when love seemed impossible, to hope when hope seemed foolish, to sacrifice everything for someone else's chance at becoming better. Jiho had given his life to save hers, not because she deserved it, but because he believed she could change, because he believed anyone could choose to be better than they were. Through her tears, Queen Velthara saw her empire's future, and for the first time in centuries, she had hope. Queen Velthara managed to escape the Grand Assembly Hall through a maintenance tunnel, but she knew it was only temporary. Jiho's sacrifice had given her time, not freedom. As she ran through the dark corridors beneath her own palace, his final words echoed in her mind. "Your people can learn to be better." But could they? Even now she could hear the conspirators, organizing search parties above her. General Velkrathos's voice boomed through the palace communication system. "The contaminated queen has fled like a coward. Find her before the human disease spreads further." For 3 days she hid in the lower levels of the palace, moving through forgotten storage areas and abandoned tunnels. She had no allies left. The nobles who might have supported her were either part of the coup or too afraid to help. Her loyal guards had been arrested or killed. She was completely alone. During those dark hours, she thought constantly about Jiho and the other humans she'd tortured. She remembered his patient smile, his gentle words, his impossible forgiveness. She thought about the files she'd read. Thousands of humans who had spent their lives helping others, caring for the weak, choosing kindness even when it brought them no reward. How had her species convinced itself that these beings were inferior? How had they mistaken love for weakness? On the 4th day, they found her. General Velkrathos led the search team personally, his plasma rifle trained on her as she emerged from a ventilation shaft. Around him stood a dozen soldiers, their faces showing no mercy for their former queen. "Your reign of weakness is over," he announced. "You will be executed publicly as an example to others who might be tempted by human contamination." They dragged her to the same Grand Assembly Hall where Jiho had died. The bloodstain from his sacrifice was still visible on the marble steps. Hundreds of Zephyrians filled the seats, their compound eyes gleaming with excitement. Public executions were rare entertainment. As they forced her to kneel in the exact spot where Jiho had fallen, Queen Velthara felt an unexpected peace settle over her. She understood now what he had tried to teach her. True strength wasn't about conquering others or inspiring fear. It was about choosing love even when love seemed impossible. "Citizens of the Empire," General Velkrathos announced to the crowd, "you witnessed the end of a leader who forgot her duty." Queen Velthara was infected by human weakness. She showed mercy to slaves, kindness to the conquered, compassion to the inferior. These diseases of the mind made her unfit to rule our superior species. The crowd cheered, but Queen Velthara barely heard them. She was remembering Jiho's stories about Earth, about humans who ran into burning buildings to save strangers, who shared their food with the hungry, who spent their lives teaching children and caring for the elderly. Any last words before justice is served? Velkrathos asked mockingly. Queen Velthara looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only sadness. You think you're executing weakness, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. But you're killing the only chance your species had to become truly strong. Human lies, he spat. We are the superior race. We conquered them in 6 months. We conquered their technology, she replied. We destroyed their cities and enslaved their bodies. But we never touched what made them truly powerful. Even now in your labor camps, they're teaching each other to read. They're caring for the sick. They're sharing what little they have with those who have less. Some of the Zephyrians in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A few had worked in the human camps and had seen exactly what she described. You want to know why Jiho saved me? She continued. Not because I deserved it, not because I was kind to him. I tortured him for months. But he saved me anyway, because that's what love does. It doesn't wait for worthiness. It doesn't demand payment. It just gives and gives and gives. Enough, Velkrathos raised his weapon. Your contamination ends here, but Queen Velthara wasn't finished. You call it contamination, but it's evolution. The humans didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because they refused to become monsters like us. Even in defeat, even in slavery, they chose to remain human. They chose to love. She thought of Jiho one last time, remembering his gentle smile and patient eyes. You're afraid of their compassion because deep down you know it's stronger than all your weapons. You know that love builds while hatred only destroys. You know that they're everything you could have been if you hadn't been so terrified of appearing weak. The energy blast struck her heart before she could say more. As her life faded, Queen Velthara's last thought wasn't of regret for her death, but of hope for what she'd learned. Somewhere in the human camps, teachers like Jiho were still showing others how to choose kindness. Somewhere, love was quietly winning against fear. Her empire would continue for now, built on cruelty and domination. But she had seen the future in Jiho's sacrifice, and she knew that empires built on fear always fell eventually. Only love lasted forever. In her final moments, she understood the greatest truth of all. The humans had never been the conquered ones. They had simply been waiting for their captors to realize who was really strong. The queen died with a smile on her face, finally free from the weakness of believing that power came from causing pain.